Hello everyone, welcome to Cine Reveal Movie Recap. Imagine a virus that doesn't spread through bites or blood, but through words. Today, we're diving into Pontypool, a horror movie where language itself becomes deadly. So let's not waste any more time. Let's watch it. The movie begins with a recording repeating that a cat named Honey has been missing. Then we meet a man named Grant. He is driving through thick snow and he is on the phone with a man named Rick. Grant is angry and disappointed by Rick, which results in him firing the man on the other end of the line. Then, Grant's phone rings again, and he struggles to grab it while driving. Since he is not able to do so, he stops his car to take the phone into his hands. Right at that moment, a woman bangs on his window and speaks some nonsense to him. Grant is having a hard time understanding what she is saying. He decides to open his car window to speak with the woman, but in response, the woman walks away without saying anything else. Grant speaks back to her, but the only reply he gets is his voice echoing back to him. Grant soon arrives outside a building and steps out of his car. He takes his time to examine the entrance and then moves inside. As it seems, he just entered a radio station. He seems to be a bit eccentric, and he tries to hype himself up before he meets with his associates. Then, he meets a young woman named Laurel Ann, and she congratulates him on his morning show. On the other hand, Grant congratulates her back because the show would not be as successful as it is if Laurel was not a good researcher. She is able to dig up great dirt on various people. Apart from being associates in the radio, the two of them seem to be having a side deal as well. Laurel finds some good alcohol for him and provides him with it before the show. As everything is probably ready, Laurel exclaims their motto, which is, before he moves inside his studio, Grant asks Laurel to research the most recent 911 calls that have occurred and actually see if she can find anything interesting. Then Grant makes his coffee and he pours some alcohol in it before he starts his show. Laurel signals him that he is on air, and Grant makes the introduction. Then he teases his listeners by telling them he had a weird incident happening to him this morning. He does not disclose any more information, but he is going to need their help later today in order to determine under what conditions a person should call the police. Before he continues, a woman named Sydney enters the studio and Grant mentions just that. Sydney is the producer of the show. Additionally, he mentions that Laurel Ann is also present in the room, letting the people know that she served in Afghanistan. Sydney comments that everybody already knows that, and adds that she was also awarded for her bravery in the battlefield. Laurel corrects her and says she was awarded a homecoming hero, and they all crack some jokes with each other. Grant takes the mic again, and he starts discussing the terrible weather outside. This bad weather is probably going to last all day. So that is going to be today's big news. Next, Grant speaks on the phone with a man named Ken Loney, who is a weather forecaster. Ken is on a chopper named the Sunshine Chopper, and he mentions that he will stay above the clouds while this storm goes on. Grant wonders if it will be safe for him to stay in the chopper during this bad weather, but Ken replies that he knows what he is doing. Sydney tries to stop Grant from asking about the Sunshine Chopper for some reason, and Laurel tells her that Grant is just worried about Ken. After that, Grant plays a police recording and makes some comments on it. His producer Sydney tries to stop him from discussing criminal activity and politics. But Grant seems to be very passionate about this topic. He mentions that the region's drug farmers are using booby traps and aggressive dogs to keep prying eyes away. The problem is, these are local neighborhoods, and Grant wonders what would happen if a boy would throw his ball in one of these areas. Sydney tries to prevent Grant from speaking, but Grant lets his listeners know what's happening. He also mentions his no prisoners policy, which means he will discuss anything no matter the consequences. Eventually, Sydney cuts him off and she tells him to stick to the usual. Grant is pissed at her for cutting him off like that, but Sydney, on the other hand, believes the people of this town already know the things he is trying to discuss about. Gossip travels very fast in areas like theirs, and she does not believe there is something Grant can tell his listeners that they do not already know. However, Grant argues that he is trying to do the best for the radio. If he manages to piss the listeners off, they will stay tuned to their frequency and not change them to listen to somebody else. When a person is angry, they will stick around just because they get addicted to that feeling, and they might even call their friends to tell them to listen to the same thing. Laurel receives a phone call, but it has nothing to do with Grant's story. In fact, she is only able to hear some rumble. Then, Grant receives a call from a listener who suggests the authorities need to formulate a new number, a 9 to 12 number, for people to call when they are in doubt about calling 911. While the listener is outlining his idea, Laurel feeds Grant some breaking news. The police has reported a hostage situation where two fishermen are holding some people inside a van at gunpoint. But while Grant reads the news, he starts smiling and lets everyone know that the situation has resolved itself. As it seems, the policemen were drunk and arrested the two fishermen who had no weapons on them. Sydney tries to stop Grant from ridiculing the police, but he keeps going until he is ready to change the subject and connect to Ken Loney again. Then, Sydney bursts into Grant's booth and scolds him for ridiculing the two policemen because everybody in town knows they are two drunks. However, they are still struggling to keep their jobs. Once they are done talking about them, Sydney reveals something that Grant had no idea of. Ken Loney is not in a real chopper, but he rather sits on a hill to observe the weather, and he plays sound effects when they connect with him. However, she advises Grant to not reveal that to their listeners because they love having Ken in this hypothetical chopper. Later on, Sydney receives a call from Ken, and she seems to be quite worried. Ken is speaking fast, and he is nervous, which prompts Sydney to tell him to slow down because she can't understand him. She feeds the story to Grant, and he connects live to Ken. Ken says that a crowd of people have gathered outside of the office of a man named Dr. John Mendez. John Mendez has been accused in the past of prescribing unnecessary drugs to his patient. Ken reports that the crowd is trying to break in the building, and he soon gets terrified as he sees people overwhelming the building and getting spilled out of it. Ken says that the people are behaving bizarrely, and they are even trampling over each other. Soon, Ken becomes too scared to talk, and he mentions that military vehicles are closing in, both trucks and helicopters. Grant loses his connection to Ken, and he has to change topic. Meanwhile, 5 actors from a theatric play come to the radio station while Grant is trying to keep his listeners occupied by doing a recap of the events that have faced till now. When Laurel plays a commercial, Grant walks out of the studio and asks Sydney if she knows something more. Sydney lets him know that they have nothing on the wire just yet, so they have to wait and buy themselves some time. Grant asks her what she wants him to do, and Sydney tells him to interview the cast from Lawrence of Arabia, while Laurel will try to find out more information about the incident at John Mendez's office. Grant disagrees with that because they have their listeners hooked and they should not break the flow, but Sydney is very clear on her intentions, since they need to check more stuff around Ken's story. Grant takes the cast in the studio, and they sing a song for the listeners. Grant receives a phone call and uses his phone as an excuse to kill his boredom until this cast is over with their song. Meanwhile, Sydney sees Grant being impatient, and she tells him they will have somebody on the line for him as soon as the cast finishes their song. By the end of the song, a weird thing happens. A girl that participates in the play says that she can't remember how it ends. Grant asks her to be more specific, but the girl totally ignores him. She tries to speak the title of the play, but she ends up frantically repeating a word that nobody can understand. When the actors are gone, Sydney passes through a line and a man named Steve. The man has claimed that he is inside Mendez's office, but once they connect to him, they can only hear him screaming, while mob voices are also picked up in the background. However, Sydney and Laurel receive more reports from eyewitnesses that say a mob was indeed trying to get inside Mendez's office. On the other hand, Sydney is trying to communicate with Ken, but they get no reply. At some point, Sydney wonders if this whole thing is a hoax and people are messing with them. The radio station begins receiving some more phone calls, but the problem is these people are speaking too fast and pronouncing words that Laurel and Sydney can't understand at all. Later, Grant announces that around 70 people have been reported dead, and he connects to Constable Rowland, who confirms that something crazy is going on, but he is not yet fully informed about the situation. While they try to figure out what is going on, a news anchor from the BBC World named Nigel calls the station, and he wants to speak with Grant live on air. Sydney connects them, and Nigel asks if the rumors are true that the military has been engaged against a mob, and if this has anything to do with a terrorist group. Grant tells him that this has nothing to do with any political movement or terrorist group, but something is clearly wrong. After they terminate the connection to Nigel, Ken calls them back, and Sydney passes him through to Grant. Ken is on air, and he says that he is trying to protect himself. He begs Grant for some help, and asks him to call the police. He is very scared as he is trying to hide. The people have gone crazy. They seem to be themselves, but they behave like animals. At some point, he sees them dragging some people out of a van and eating them. One of those beings hears Ken and rushes towards the house he is hiding in. This creature has lost its arms and bangs on the wall so hard that it can't move. The creature starts saying something, and Ken moves closer to it in order to hear what it is saying. The noise passes through to the radio station, and the only thing that can be heard is some nonsense. After some sudden white noise, the connection to Ken is lost. Laurel tries to translate the message, and it says something like, "Stay away from family members and only talk to babies." Laurel translates more of the message, and Grant now reads it for his listeners, mentioning way too many times that they have not identified the source of this message. Nonetheless, the message declares that people need to avoid any kind of endearment, even speaking words such as honey and sweetheart. Lastly, the message pleads them to not translate it in other languages. Sydney receives a call from a citizen of Pontypool, and the man tells her that everyone needs to stay inside because the town has been quarantined. Ken returns with another phone call and tells everyone that the creature that attacked him is a teenage boy. He approaches the boy, and this time everybody hears a baby's voice asking for its mother's help. At that point, Grant starts losing his mind. He has a short talk with Sydney, and he wonders if somebody is messing with him. He wonders if Sydney has set this up to crack a laugh. Sydney replies that she would never pull a prank that would involve dead people, and let alone pull that prank on air and terrorize the listeners. Since he is having a hard time believing this is happening, he wants to go outside and make sure that something is wrong. Grant walks out of the studio and Laurel has no other choice but to play some tapes. The producer needs Grant back on his chair, but he insists on taking a walk. He needs to confirm that there is something solid, and this is happening to everybody, and not only him. Sydney and Laurel try to stop him since going out is dangerous, but Grant believes they are messing with him and he goes outside. Although the only thing he can see is snow, the three of them start hearing the words Sydney was telling Grant being repeated. Laurel pulls everyone in and the radio station is soon attacked. That actually makes Grant happy because they have a real enemy to face. Sydney starts worrying about her kids, but Grant consoles her by saying that they are miles away with their father, which means they are not probably facing the same situation as Pontypool. Later, behind locked doors, Laurel takes care of Sydney's hand because she has been cut. The problem is, Laurel starts speaking some nonsense herself. At the same time, Dr. John Mendez sneaks into the radio station. Sydney is worried about Laurel, but Mendez tells her to leave her alone for the time being, and he takes Sydney inside the booth. Laurel follows them soon, and Sydney wants to let her in, but Mendez stops her from doing so. He believes that Laurel is sick just like the other ones, and they need to keep her in distance. This booth might even help them because Laurel will not hear their voices, and that might disorient her for a bit. Grant announces live that he has Dr. Mendez with him. Mendez starts speaking to the listeners, but just then, Laurel starts banging on the front glass of the booth. Mendez mentions that he has seen the same thing to others, but while he tries to explain what is happening, he mostly speaks some nonsense that is not clear. Ken calls again, and Grant interrupts Mendez in order to speak with his reporter, who is still hiding in a silo near Pontypool. Ken mentions that the creature that was with him has died, but also says that other creatures walk by occasionally. Mendez asks him if he has heard them say anything, and Ken replies that they were saying they have to be wary of the U-boat. Ken goes on to predict that the way they all chant together is a symptom of their disorder, but he mistakenly uses the word symbol. Mendez tries to correct him, and Ken tries to correct himself, but that only results in him losing his own word. Ken starts becoming more and more confused, and the group realizes that his mind is gone. After they say goodbye to him, Laurel returns, and her mouth is covered in blood. Mendez finds that strange, as he believed that these infected humans are attracted to sound. He asks Grant if he is certain Laurel can't hear them outside of the booth, and Grant answers he is quite sure. Since she can't hear them, Mendez wonders if the infected humans can read their lips. That leads him to the conclusion that the virus is not transferred by the blood or the air, but rather by word, despite not all words are infected, but only a selected few of them. So when a contaminated word is spoken, it infects the person that hears it. Grant wonders if speaking on the radio could potentially be harmful to the world, but Mendez discusses another aspect of the virus. It is not enough to just hear a word, but one has to understand it. In that sense, if somebody listens to a word and they understand its meaning, the virus infects them and transforms inside their own consciousness. Soon, Sydney receives a phone call from her children while Laurel returns and starts banging the booth. While Sydney speaks sweetly to her kids, Laurel gets angrier and bangs the glass until the phone lines are cut off. Then, she vomits onto the glass. Dr. Mendez comes to the realization that an infected person needs to find another person in order to transmit the virus. If they don't manage to do that, they die just like Laurel did now. Soon, more infected join the radio station, and Grant turns the lights off. The group of three sits down quietly and they try to come up with a plan. Their method of communication is restricted to writing on a piece of paper. They agree to record a message and play it so that the infected follow it. Grant grabs the mic and connects it to a speaker outside. He repeats the phrase, "Sydney is alive," a couple of times, and Sydney loops it. The infected begin to scatter and walk away, but now Mendez seems to have been infected and he starts speaking a foreign language. Grant and Sydney decide to communicate in French from now on since it seems only the English language is infected. They leave the booth slowly and let Mendez rest inside. Carefully as they walk, they have missed the young girl creeping in the corner. The girl attacks them, and the two friends have to kick her until she is dead. Feeling guilty, they argue who killed the girl, and who needs to kill Mendez if he attacks them in the booth. Then, they have to face another problem as a speaker in the station starts playing loud music. They destroy the speaker, but the infected have already swarmed in. Escaping in another room, Grant and Sydney hold the door while Mendez runs away through a window. Thankfully, Grant and Sydney manage to seal the door and buy themselves some time. On the other hand, the two of them are locked and Sydney starts losing it. She drinks a lot and is in a mood for chatting. Grant tries to keep her voice down, but she believes they have no chance of escaping. Soon, Sydney becomes infected with the word kill, but Grant tries to help her distort the meaning of that word. The two of them agree that the word kill will actually mean kiss, and the two of them kiss to make it more credible. Grant believes he found a cure for the virus, and he wants to perform one last radio show to try and cure the whole world. The two of them jumpstart the show, and Grant tries to make the people understand that the trick is to stop understanding the word. To do that, they need to swap some words for others. While the show goes on, though, the military is attacking the area around and things get scary. Grant screams on the microphone and all the noise stops. He tries to end the broadcast with a message full of hope, but when he reaches the end of his heartfelt speech, a countdown starts. Knowing that everything will go to hell and the military will probably kill them, Sydney walks into the booth and kisses Grant.